Howdy freeze dryers, welcome to my freeze drying space, my freeze drying room / studio. This whole space has been a complete blessing for me, but if you're like me, you have one major problem with freeze drying. If you've been freeze drying for more than a couple months, especially if you have a large or an XL, or if you've just been freeze drying 24/7, you're quickly running out of space. So today's video, we're gonna show you one of the top 5 questions that I get, and that is, how do we store our freeze dried food? And just a couple tips and tricks on how to set up your workspace and hopefully organize your freeze dried food. So I realize today's tips and situations will not apply to everyone, but the purpose of this video today is hopefully to at least give you a few ideas that you can hopefully use and apply to your own situation, and maybe do some brainstorming with the ideas provided in this video. So possibly one of the most important things when you're starting freeze drying is getting your workspace set up. And if you do not have a lot of room, every little inch and square foot is very crucial to your whole setup. And the setup of your freeze drying space will also determine whether or not you enjoy freeze drying. So believe it or not, a lot of the stuff that is in my freeze drying room actually came with the studio, and it kind of inspired me to add on to it and kind of utilize what I had. And one of the coolest things about this is it came with all these stainless steel tables, and really you can pick these up for not that much money. The stainless is nice because it doesn't stain. It's very sanitary. They're pretty much bulletproof as far as food preparation goes. They also have a little bit of storage underneath, which is nice. You can put your extra things underneath. The shelving underneath is actually adjustable, so you can raise it up if you want to. All of the legs have little things that you can adjust to level it out. And once you get several of them put together, you have a nice clean workspace that's never gonna stain, and it's super easy to clean up. Now, I've also used these for my freeze dryers as well as my vacuum chamber sealer, just so they each kind of have their own area to sit in. And then most of the time I put the things for the chamber sealer underneath. I put the trays for the medium with the medium or on top of the medium, and then I do the same with the XL. You'll also notice that my pumps are under the freeze dryers. That shelf actually is perfect to put the pump on. It also makes it easier to do oil changes and things like that. Another thing that this workspace came with, and I realize this doesn't apply to everyone, is a sink. If you can have a sink that's nearby, a place to clean up trays, a place to clean up your dirty dishes after you make large quantities of food to freeze dry, that's a huge one. So enough about the workspace, because every person's situation and room size is completely different. So hopefully that gave you at least a couple of ideas here and there. Let's talk about food storage, the more important thing, and that is a problem that we all have, because even if you have a giant space, if you start freeze drying for years, I've been freeze drying for working on 6 years now, and the food just starts building up and building up and building up. I rotate mine so I keep it fresh as possible. I think the oldest thing I have now is probably 4.5 years old, somewhere in there. When you rotate also, it lets you kind of get an eye on your inventory and possibly learn from mistakes. If you made some along the way, you can kind of see what didn't work, what did work. Hopefully everything did work, but that's not always the case. And when you're rotating, that actually gives you a good opportunity to log everything into an inventory sheet or a log sheet. It's a good habit to get into if you have not already. There's tons of them out there. We have some on the Facebook group. I'm sure you can find one on the MeWe group as well. We also have a version at Freeze Drying Cookbook if you're a member of the Freeze Drying Cookbook. I mentioned that this space came with a lot of things that I could reuse, which is really part of the reason why we use this space for what we do with freeze drying, because it had a lot of stuff that worked really well for freeze drying. These shelves I wasn't so sure about at first, but they have actually been awesome. This space came with a couple of these. We purchased even more because we liked them so much. They are on casters, so you could move them around. You can actually stack them so they were 4 deep instead of sitting next to each other like this. So if you're limited on space, you can just kind of crunch them all together. And I really like being able to roll them around, because if you are tight on space, then you can just put what you need on the shelf and then just pack them right in front of each other, and really, floor space wise, you're really not taking up that much room. The other thing that I like about them is I was able to label each shelf with what type of food. You can sort them however you want. You can sort them by meat type. You can sort them by sides or appetizers or fruits and vegetables, We do some shelves in just grab and go, and that way if we're going for a hike or going camping or something like that, you can just grab it off the shelf, and that way you have a meal in a bag that you can just grab and go. Shelves are also adjustable, so if you're using one size of a particular bag and you're using multiples of that, you can make it so that it's the right size or right height for the bag. If you press it up against a wall, depending on what kind of bags you're using, you know, you can push these and kind of inventory them that way. You can go several bags deep. If you're using gusseted bags, then you can actually stack them and fit a whole bunch of bags onto the shelf because they stand upright, especially if they've been vacuum sealed. They tend to, they stand upright really nice. And if you like to store in mason jars, these can do a ton of mason jars. You can probably do 100 jars on one of these shelves. And then I actually cut some plastic liners to fit on the shelf, so they're a flat surface. You probably wouldn't have to have them, but that way you have an easy way to clean off something if it spills. It also gives it a nice flat surface for things to rest on. And in the past I've used these plastic shelves. That's what I was using before, these metal ones. Those work great too. You can't move them around, however. They're probably a little bit less expensive, but I really like these steel shelves. I want to go over a couple more options that are very good options. A lot of people have used pegboards for organizing. The nice thing about these is if you get a bag like the kind that we sell, they have a hang tag on them, so you can actually just hang the bag right on there. What I like to do with these, if you get multiple layers or columns or whatever of these, then you can label this like A1, A2, A3, A4, and you can log it into a sheet, and then you can document what is in that zone or whatever you want to call it. And it's very easy to find food that you're looking for, especially specific ingredients. The nice thing about this option too is it just takes up wall space. Mine are kind of just sitting on the floor right now, but you can imagine if you had, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 of those hanging on the wall, you know, you're not taking up any of your floor space, you're just taking up wall space, and you could actually fit quite a few bags. I also use it for just different tools, oxygen absorbers. You know, there's a million different things you can get for these pegboard systems. So it's really handy for organization. And as you know, if you stay organized and freeze drying, it just makes everything that much easier. And then the last one I want to go over is what I used to use up until really about a year and a half ago, are these Rubbermaid containers or totes. You see these things everywhere. They are all pretty much universal or uniform shapes and sizes, so you can fit a ton of freeze-dried food in here as long as you stay organized. You want to keep it labeled. The nice thing about these are relatively rodent-proof as well because they're plastic. If you had them sitting on the floor or whatever and you had a flood in your basement or your storage area where you're storing your freeze-dried food, you know, they can handle some water as well. But maybe the biggest reason I like these is ball jars or mason jars fit in these really, really well. And if you're using the most common size, the quart size, 15 of them will fit in here perfectly. And then you can do another layer. So 30 mason jars fit into these tubs really, really nice. And it just makes a nice way to keep everything organized. And 30 mason jars full of freeze-dried food is actually a whole lot of freeze-dried food. And the nice thing about mason jars, obviously, is that you can see what's in them. And then if your mason jars are in a tote like this, it's gonna protect it from light, which is one of the next things we're gonna go over. To have successful freeze-dried food, you need to prevent light, you need to prevent moisture and oxygen as well in order to have a long-term successful storage of your freeze-dried food. And if you want more information on how to properly store your freeze-dried food and just some kind of general information, make sure you go back and check out our Food Storage 101 video. We're also going to be releasing a Mylar 101 video as well as an Oxygen Absorber 101 video sometime in the near future that will help and kind of go along with this series of videos. If you're interested in any of the products that we mentioned for freeze drying, tables, storage, any of that stuff today, as usual, we will have links down in the description for those. Hopefully you found this information useful in this video. If you did, please let us know by giving us a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed to this freeze drying channel yet, it's Live Life Simple. You can click on the rocking chair down in the corner. As usual, thanks for joining me today and supporting my YouTube channel. Remember to live life simple, and we'll catch you next week.